Welcome back. The European Union's top leadership has undertaken a historic visit to India with an aim to strengthen commercial and diplomatic ties amid strained relations with the United States. EU President Ursula von der Leyen, along with her College of Commissioners, engaged in high-level discussions with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and other top government officials. Why does it matter? Let's break it down for you. The EU chief's visit to the national capital has arrived as a massive boost to the partnership between New Delhi and Brussels. India and the European Union have agreed to finalize a long-pending free trade agreement by the end of this year. They will enhance cooperation in the sectors of trade, technology, connectivity and even defence, highlighting that India-EU strategic partnership is natural and that at its core is trust and shared belief in democratic values. Prime Minister Modi even announced that there will be increased focus on the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor. But there's more to this. Ursula von der Leyen's visit comes at the backdrop of US President Donald Trump's pending Brussels' traditionally close partnership with Washington, leaving EU on the lookout for new allies such as India. The country is just the right fit. So here's why the Delhi visit is significant for the European Union. This visit marks Brussels' latest effort to reduce dependency on the United States, particularly since Trump's return to the White House. The EU is looking to emerge as a stable global partner for business and is looking to build renewed reliance on trusted allies. Now, as far as EU chief in India is concerned, they have also been abandoned by Trump, and now that EU is reaching out, is Europe needing India more than ever? That's a question we'll be posing to our guests.
India is a like-minded friend. We are the two largest democracies in the world. We are bound by shared convictions and values. From resilient supply chains, we are shared interest to a free and open Indo-Pacific. We're working together.
हमारी पार्टनरशिप को एलिवेट और एक्सेलरेट करने के लिए कई महत्वपूर्ण निर्णय लिए गए हैं। बायलैटरल फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट को, एफटीए को इस वर्ष के अंत तक संपन्न करने का निर्देश दिया।
All right, and joining me on the broadcast is Ambassador Anil Vadva, who's a former diplomat. I'll also be joined in by Tara Kartha, who's a former director at NSCS in just a bit. But Ambassador, thank you so much for joining in. I want to ask you, when Prime Minister Modi says that the India and EU relationship, especially the strategic partnership, is one that is very natural and organic, how do you see this through the prism of the changing geopolitical climate?
Well, I think EU and India have been engaging with each other at the highest levels for quite some time now. In fact, after 2021, we've seen a definite change in the way both parties have engaged with each other. The focus has been much more on technology, and that's why we had the technology and trade partnership, which was announced, and the first meeting was held earlier. This is the second such meeting. But meanwhile, many things have happened. And of course, we have to look at it in the context of what's happening in the world today. As you rightly pointed out, it's the question of Europe looking for new partners in the light of the strain that it finds itself, the transatlantic partnership finds itself because of the new presidency in the United States. But of course, a visit of this nature, which is a very high-powered delegation from the European Union, has to be prepared for much in advance.
Right,
so
Ambassador, I'm sure you'll agree that our defense cooperation and strategic partnership is now going to strengthen. It's also a sort of a new beginning because remember, as far as maritime security is concerned, contribution to security in the Indo-Pacific is concerned, we are just getting started. Remember, it was only in October of 2023 that our first set of naval drills between Brussels and New Delhi actually happened.
You're right, absolutely. And that was a very significant exercise of the Gulf of Guinea in 2023. And of course, the focus now from the European Union on a future security and defense partnership is something which is very notable. This was actually announced by Ursula von der Leyen when she was speaking at a think tank earlier this morning. But then we heard about it also in the joint press conference. And it has many elements to it. It's not just the naval cooperation, it has
Yes.
cybersecurity and counterterrorism as well. And plus, the interoperability which will come in later with these kind of exercises. This is all very significant.
Ambassador, how do you respond to now the fact that EU is looking for a reliable partner? And soon after touchdown, that's what the EU president had to say. Ursula von der Leyen's first words were trusted friend, strategic ally. Why the use of strategic ally now?
As I said, that now the EU finds itself in a position where it needs to find partners around the world who are reliable supply chain partners in particular. So we are not just looking at plain trade and investments. We are also looking at countries which have the manufacturing capability and with whom the EU can do business in the new age industries. India is definitely one of them. In fact, at top of the list, if I would say so, because of its trained manpower and the amount of work that India has done in AI, for instance, and also in terms of the transition to the new age industries. So the EU definitely looks at India with new eyes today and would definitely like to partner with India in all these fields. And for that, a number of steps have also been announced today, as we can see in the joint statement.
How much of it would you attribute to a mercurial US president such as Donald Trump? Not to forget the kind of imagery that is now coming out of the Oval Office. Earlier, we've seen how the French president had to make that polite intervention when the Ukraine conflict was being discussed or the funding for it. And today itself, we've seen a very conciliatory UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer turn on that charm offensive by offering that invite from King Charles.
So the EU definitely would like to preserve the transatlantic alliance in whichever form it can, because it still needs the backing of the United States for security and defense purposes. And of course, it sees the Ukraine conflict also in that light, where the involvement of the United States in any security guarantees in future becomes crucial as far as the EU is concerned. It does not find itself in a position where it can take on the whole burden all of a sudden. It needs transition time. And although the signs were there for some time, I think the pronouncements of JD Vance in Europe, in the Munich Security Conference, for instance, have actually come as a rude shock to many in the leadership in Europe. So obviously there is a realization that you need other partners, that you need to diversify your partnerships, and you want to work with other countries in various fields, including security and defense.
And when you're talking about, diversifying those partnerships, I would also quickly like to bring in Tara Kartha, the former director at NSCS. She's just joined in. Good to see you, Tara. Tara, I think Ambassador has made some very valid points. I think one of them is also about diversifying the needs as far as EU is concerned. We've been discussing how it's looking towards India as at not just a reliable trade partner, which it already has been, given that they'll both be now working towards an FTA. But what's interesting this time around is that there will be greater focus on upping the defense cooperation. Your thoughts?
I think, see, in terms of the EU itself, I mean, EU doesn't have a defense framework. I mean, it has, but it doesn't work that well, right? It's a more a NATO centric. It doesn't have an EU defense, all that stuff. But individual countries, you have an excellent relationship with France, for instance. A problem ahead is, as usual, it arises from the Trump, series on China, the Trump things on Europe.
Yes.
EU doesn't have a very strong problem with China. They are okay. I mean, as far as vis-a-vis the US, the EU would prefer that they have a, that the EU prefers to have a decent relationship with China, though they just had a security and defense dialogue recently with China, where yeah, they were irritants. Like they didn't like the Chinese called out the fact that the EU took offense to some aspects of Xinjiang. There was aspects of people being deported from Thailand. So all that the Chinese embassy in Europe has been taking exception to that. But overall, while the EU is worried about the trade deficit with China, which is very high, they don't have actually any security issues with them. So when you're talking of defense, I honestly don't know how it's going to work. Because it's if you have a problem with China, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming the EU would definitely stand for your sovereignty. It would stand for democracy. All the things that we believe in is what the EU also has very, very strongly. Its foundation is based on that. So that, yes, but if push comes to shove, what happens?
I think that's a very critical point, because and moving just away from defense cooperation, I want to bring in Ambassador on the note of the changing global order. Just as Tara was pointing out how EU doesn't seem to be having an issue with China, the United States doesn't seem to be having issues with Russia any longer, and as we speak, the Ukrainian president is very much on American soil. How is this now going to work out for the security framework of NATO overall? And where does this leave NATO, also Ukraine's own demands to become a member of NATO?
Well, I think one thing that we all in India agree on, and I think that's fairly clear, is that the membership of Ukraine in NATO is going to be extremely difficult, even though the Europeans might want it that way. Membership in EU, yes, but NATO membership is far off. That's number one. So that means that the Europeans have to step up for their own security in Europe, and that is what President Trump has been urging NATO to step up and take responsibility in terms of whatever happens in the aftermath of a peace deal in Ukraine. Number two, about the rapprochement between the United States and Russia. I think there is a method behind that, because United States would like to concentrate much more on the number one threat that they have technologically for superiority in the world, and that is China. And of course, while in the short term we might see a rapprochement between United States and China also on the trade and investment
Right?
front, but on the trade and investment front. But otherwise, going forward on the issue of technological superiority and denial of technology, I think the policies of the United States are going to very much continue in the future.
Tara, why is AI occupying such an exclusive space in this whole bilateral relationship between Brussels and New Delhi? Soon after, Prime Minister also co-chaired that AI Action Summit in Paris. We are now seeing AI is very much part of the memorandums of understanding. At the same time, we all know the critical role it will be playing in shaping up this entire relationship. Even Ursula von der Leyen's own visuals of experiencing India's UPI technology have already gone viral.
Yeah, you're asking me?
Yes, Tara.
No, AI is now very fundamental to any bilateral relationship you're going to have. I mean, this is supposedly an area, I'm not sure about this, but I'm assuming.
I've been interacting with a couple of EU parliamentarians, and it seems that there's special focus on AI and digital technology.
Yeah, because this is it's a key, absolutely critical area in terms of when you talk of ISET, now you talk of the new Trump thing of how we need to go ahead. The AI aspect and is so key to all of this. When you're talking of semiconductors, you're talking of anything, all this is the key aspect. So if we have to go forward in technology, we need to take the EU along. I'm just hoping that, if this becomes a bedrock between EU and India in terms of future cooperation, that's a great thing for us. That would be amazing, because we have a lot to contribute in this area. And, people tend to discount the ability of India in this field, but we have some brilliant young minds here. And I've seen this in terms of another area where AI is also crucial in terms of innovation. The brilliance is amazing. Sorry. All you need is to
Right. All right, I think I'll let you catch your breath over there. And I'd like to give Ambassador closing thoughts. Ambassador, at a time we are also witnessing this being called a monumental visit, given that, the EU College of Commissioners are visiting their first, country out of EU, and that is India. That's the kind of importance that Brussels is placing on New Delhi. Having said that, at a time, the United States is putting those arrangements and making it even tougher for all of those who are looking towards immigrating. Will EU become a reliable alternate option?
Well, definitely, it's an outstanding kind of visit because the European Union has been preparing for this for some time, and the decision has, of course, been taken many months in advance to have a delegation of this size and stature. So, 22 of the commissioners, 27 commissioners of the European Union are here in India, led by Ursula von der Leyen. So that itself is significant. But I think overall, because of the emphasis on technology and also innovation, this becomes a different kind of visit. And also this morning, when you were talking just now about AI, I noticed that Ursula von der Leyen, in particular, emphasized on clean technology, AI, and high performance computing
Right.
at the same time,
Right.
plus the security aspect. So from all these angles, I think
All
for
right.
them,
But
and to
Tara,
fix a deadline,
quick 15 seconds for closing thoughts. How this will impact immigration for Indians who are looking to go abroad?
That's going to be a slightly difficult area because the EU overall, we saw in the last elections, the EU is moving to the right. There's no two ways. The vote of the right has doubled itself.
Yes.
It's still not still not a majority, but after
It's
you
on
just
the
saw,
rise for sure.
yeah, it is going to be a problem. So the only thing is, one hopes that once you sort of take India's image as a provider of technology, as a market which they want,
All right.
then the image starts to change.
All right, I'll have to leave it at that. Many thanks to you, Tara and Ambassador Vadva, for joining in. Now, in an exclusive conversation with Member of EU Parliament Michael McNamara about the many implications of this visit and the Russia factor, listen in to what he had to say. Talking about India and the EU, it is the equation which stems from a friend in need is a friend indeed. Why do you say so? And what is the need of the hour for Brussels and New Delhi?
Well, I mean, we all need friends, and countries are the same as, and even large blocs are the same. I mean, Donald Trump's government, and I have the greatest of respect for Mr. Trump, maybe more than many have. He's invested heavily in the area that I represented in the Irish Parliament and represent now. Said that. Is quoted as having said that the European Union was founded to screw the United States. Now, that is simply not true. The European Union was founded to stop European countries screwing each other. The European Union has always cooperated very closely with the United States and looked to cooperate closely with other areas. But as we become a more sort of bipolar world with the United States and China racing in an AI race, we clearly need friends and we need allies. And our friends are usually people whose values we share, and clearly there's a lot of overlap between the values of India and the values that have been espoused by India and those of the European Union.
We speak at a time the EU President Ursula von der Leyen, accompanied by the EU commissioners, is coming to New Delhi. Why do you think this is going to be a monumental visit, and what can India and, of course, EU stand to gain in this geopolitical climate which is changing by the day?
Well, as you said yourself, von der Leyen didn't just come here on her own. I mean, she regularly visits countries. I'm sure has visited India many times in the past, but it's the entire European Commission is here. The whole College of Commissioners are here. I'm not aware of that College of Commissioners ever having met outside of the European Union before. The fact that they're doing so here in India is clearly a statement of intent. Clearly, there's a lot more cooperation. We saw your Prime Minister co-host the AI Summit in Paris, the AI Action Summit in Paris. The next summit is going to be here. That's an area that India is developing rapidly, and it's hoped, the European Union is certainly hoping to catch up with other parts of the world with regard to the use of AI in its industries right across and the digital economy more broadly. And that is, I think, something it shares with India, and that they could work hopefully together for their both benefits. Because at the end of the day, any cooperation between states has to be for their mutual benefit. So we need to make sure that our cooperation with India is mutually beneficial, that the European Union benefits, but so does India, because that's how long-standing friendships are maintained.
How do you think the EU is going to now strategize with a tectonic shift with the new Trump administration, as far as the war in Ukraine is concerned? We've seen that tectonic shift under the Trump administration towards Russia. What does that now mean for EU?
Well, on one level, it means that the European Union has, and it's been has looked more carefully at its own security, how it can ensure its own defence and its own security. Many European leaders have said that, but in my personal view is that the European Union also needs to reflect on what has happened, because a certain approach has been followed. I mean, let's be honest, many European leaders, including from my own state, went and campaigned in the United States elections and campaigned for Donald Trump's opponent. That, in my view, wasn't very wise, and we now see what's happening partly as a result of that and partly as a result of the platforms on which he's campaigned. I mean, Europe has become perhaps very good at preaching and not very good at talking to people. That, in my view, is very regrettable, and we need to be maybe less preachy in our relations with the world and perhaps less dogmatic and more adopt a more listening approach.
I'd like your response to what the Russian ambassador has just said in his interview to our managing editor. And let me quote what he in fact has to say. He's gone on to talk about how Europe cannot be secured without Russia, Russia cannot be secured without Europe. There's a need for collective security that's acceptable to all. I'd like your thoughts.
I think that's very self-evidently true. I mean, there was a lot of cooperation envisaged at the end of the Cold War, the Helsinki process. I'm not entirely sure that the European side followed through on that they viewed Russia as the equal partner that they could and should have viewed Russia as. I think there was a degree to which certain assurances weren't followed through on. None of that justifies the aggression in Ukraine. Absolutely it doesn't. But I do think it's true, and we need to look at how we can cooperate. There's no point in preaching at each other in the world in which we live. We need to talk to each other, and I think my view is the European Union has been much better at preaching than it's been at talking to Russia, and clearly Russia is a superpower in the world, doesn't like to be preached to. Who does? I don't like to be preached to, but I very much welcome that statement of fact, and hopefully we can start talking to each other about a just peace in the Ukraine and across the continent, which